They said the weather was good enough. The sea wore a gray lid, the kind that flattens distance and fools you into thinking the world is calm. On the dive support vessel, Koosha-1, work lights threw a golden island across the deck, humming over the compressors and the winches and the tangle of umbilicals that kept men tethered to a living ship. Inside the saturation chamber, 6 divers lived on a different clock. They spoke softly in the metal echo, sleeves rolled, cards rubber-banded in a tidy deck, oxygen numbers checked as reflexively as breath. Another pipeline bite taken from the seabed. Another shift logged. Another long step in the slow staircase back to surface pressure. The Persian Gulf, an arm of the Indian Ocean, moved against the hull like a big animal turning in its sleep. Wind rose the way trouble always does at sea, not with thunder, but with a change you feel in your stance. On the DP console, the captain watched green numbers wander toward amber. The ship edged. He corrected. Edged again. "We're holding," someone said, because that's what you say until it's no longer true. A tender on deck checked the chamber's sight glass and lifted a thumb to the divers within. "Nearly there. Hold steady. The long wait is almost over." Then the sea came up hard. A slap of gusts. The first ugly yaw. Cups sliding on the mess table. A toolbox clattering open like a shout. The radio barked, lost itself in static, barked again. The deckhands widened their stance, grabbed for steel that had been exactly where they needed it yesterday and was somehow too far away today. Alarms threw their cold light. The Koosha-1 began the kind of argument with gravity ships rarely win. "Abandon!" carried across the deck in a voice that sounded like it wanted a second chance to say it earlier. You don't abandon a DSV like a ferry. The rigging bites, the cranes swing. Umbilicals want to snare you and make a story of it. Men lunged for rafts that didn't want to be rafts anymore. The wind was trying to hire them as kites. One man hit his knee, grinned through surprise, and kept moving because shock likes to laugh first and ache later. "Chamber status," someone yelled over the comms. "6 in," came back. "6 in and stable." The word stable felt obscene while the deck became a wall. Inside the chamber, gravity redrafted its terms. A pen took flight and stuck at a new angle. A tin mug rang once against the ceiling and came to rest on the wrong shelf, as if the ship had always been tilted that way. One diver braced both boots on a bunk rail and kept the thermos from falling as though that were the only task that mattered. They were calm because they had to be. Saturation doesn't reward panic. Pressure can't be rushed. Not by engines, not by prayers. Outside, the storm put its shoulder into the ship. A crane boom slid past like a guillotine. A crate of hoses burst and sprayed black coils across the deck. The Koosha-1 rolled, then kept rolling, the freeboard going to 0 as if someone had unpinned the horizon. The sea is quick when she decides, and this time she decided. The vessel lost the argument. Underwater, the racket changed key. Air tore itself out of small places. Gear banged bulkheads in a savage clatter orchestra. Emergency lights did what they could. The chamber's bulbs trembled, steadied. The 6 divers breathed and counted, hours since compression, scrubber capacity, oxygen partial pressure, math that turns into prayer without announcing the change. A voice cracked into their world through the comms. Topside power loss, weather severe, rescue parties forming. "Hold position," the voice said, a sentence the chamber obeyed perfectly, and the ship could not obey at all. On the surface, orange bloomed between waves, rafts, life jackets, broken promises of flotation. Crewboats came that shouldn't have been able to, their pilots reading wind and luck like old scripture. Arms reached, wrists were grabbed, names were shouted into a wind that erased lists and then erased the men shouting them. 60 souls were pulled alive from the spill of night and foam, numbers counted in 1s and 2s, the arithmetic of stubborn rescue. 13 did not answer back. In the count of the missing were the 6 in steel, sealed in a room designed for safety, now lashed to a sinking ship that no longer knew which way was up. Morning arrived the way it always does after a wreck, late and too bright. Helicopters sniffed at the weather and shook their heads. By afternoon, the names of the missing were spoken in ports that knew them and in kitchens that knew them better. When the sea calmed, because all seas calm eventually, the chamber was located and opened. Stillness waited inside. Those men had died where they were meant to be safest, in the round room that exists to promise return. The others were found near the site, some by divers who cursed into their regulators and kept working because that is the job and the only mercy left to give. Afterward, paper put on its voice. Incident, storm, capsize, dive support vessel, Persian Gulf, saturation divers recovered. The words were careful and clean, like men in dark suits, and they left room for a smaller, messier voice to speak in homes far from the quay. The smell of shampoo in a shirt no one could bring themselves to launder, the half-mended watch strap on a dresser, the saved joke nobody would ever finish telling. In a different yard, a bellman touched a chamber wall with his palm and kept it there too long, as if the steel could learn kindness by osmosis. What went wrong? You can stack the factors until they look like certainty. Weather stood up quickly and hard. The DP could not hold. The angle was wrong at the wrong second, and the ship crossed a line that exists on no blueprint. Investigators traced sequences and arrows and timings. Protocols were adjusted in neat memoranda. Never again, not like this, men promised with their hands still smelling of rope. Then they went back to sea, because the seabed will not lay pipe for itself, and the sea respects only the attention you pay her today. There is another tally that belongs to the 6. Saturation diving is a bargain made with time and physics, and every diver trusts the ship to keep that bargain while the body waits in pressure. In October of 2011, time and physics kept their end, and the vessel could not. It is an indecent truth, the kind you can't fix with a new checklist. The chamber remained a good invention attached to a doomed platform, and the men inside had done nothing wrong. Sometimes the sea sends back a receipt where the line items are only names. If you want to mark it by the tender's thumb against the glass. A small human sign that said, "I see you, hold on," just before he vanished sideways with the list. Mark it by the neat stack of playing cards, the rubber band split to count them, the clock whose hands ticked on at a new angle as if indifferent to the tilt of the world. Mark it by the way, crews everywhere the next week paused before stepping into their own chambers and, for luck, touched each valve twice. Long after, it is easy to believe a wreck disappears when it is out of the news. But the Koosha-1 is still out there in pieces the color of the water, and the place where her chamber waited is as real as a bruise you no longer see. Crew change boats flinch a little when the wind stands up in that quadrant, the way muscle remembers what charts forget. Rigs still light at dusk. Orange coveralls still lean into the night wind. In small, bright rooms, air is measured and life runs on a different key while the clock performs its sober arithmetic. That is not defiance. It is respect, paid forward. There is a sound you learn at sea. The moment the ordinary goes strange, the beat between the first alarm and the first decision that matters. If you listen from a bunk on a quiet passage, you might think you hear it again. The tilt, the spilled tools, the scramble, the hard order softened by wind. You might think of 6 men who did everything right and ran out of luck. You might lift your cap in the dark and bow toward a part of the ocean that doesn't need a buoy to be found. And if you were to stand on a quay at dawn when the names are read, you would recognize the shape of this kind of grief. The slight nod after each name, the way the crowd breathes together, the way the sea smells exactly the same as it did yesterday, because she will not be taught by our losses. You would see the families who keep a lamp on a windowsill not for the dead, because the dead don't need light, but for the living who still ride out into weather. That lamp says, "Come back when you can, and if you can't, we will carry your name like a flare through the next storm." The Koosha-1 sank off Bushehr on October 20th, 2011. 60 were rescued. The others were not. Among them, 6 saturation divers who had trusted the steel and the math and the ship that carried both. This is the shape of what happened. The reasons are written elsewhere in crisp prose. The meaning lives here, where machines hum and men measure air, and weather pretends to be reasonable until it remembers it never promised that. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.